ダメなの？
でもどうやって読むのかもわかんねえよ。
読んじゃおうかな。
殴るぞ。
ダメだった。
殴るぞ。
なんで死んじゃうよ。
じゃあ行こうか。経験者についていく。
了解。絶対いつか使うポイントだと思うんだよな。
で、ちょっとご飯焼くか。一旦さ、ちょっと中入り用のもの作るね。これ壊せる？木あるよ。あ、オッケー。木の板渡す。
どっか柵で囲んだ方がいいな、それ。塞ぐか。
塞ぐ。
Domo. In this lesson I will go over some very basic Japanese grammar. I want to talk about Japanese verbs and the two categories they fall in. Godan and Ichidan verbs. And there are also some exceptions. The goal of this lesson is not yet to understand how to conjugate them, but we will focus more on the dictionary form of verbs to understand the two categories and give you some pointers how you can identify in which of the two categories the verbs fall into. I'm gonna spread this lesson over 3 videos. In the second video I show you how to use the dictionary form in a sentence and explain when you use them. And then there will be a third video which will be a pure practice video. So 2 lessons and 1 practice video. First of all, how can you identify a verb in the dictionary form? If we take a hiragana chart which is sorted by a, I, u, e, o, all verbs in the dictionary form will end in a syllable in the 3rd row, the u row. So in other words, all verbs in the dictionary form end with u. Here are some examples, and the 2 rows of verbs are most definitely not already sorted in a certain way. Okay, I'm lying. I already sorted them into Godan on the left side and Ichidan verbs on the right side. The first line, the Godan verbs, is the category which most Japanese verbs fall into. And on the right side we have Ichidan verbs. So what is the difference between the two? First of all, the names translate into 5-level and 1-level verbs. The meaning of that I will explain in a moment. So first of all, to understand the difference better, or to see what the difference is, we have to first find out what is the root of the verbs and what are the suffixes that changes when you conjugate them. For Godan verb, the part we conjugate is the last vowel. Anything before is the root, which in most cases won't change. Most cases. For Ichidan verbs, it's a bit different. For once, maybe you realize that Ichidan verbs all end with the syllable ru. And this is no coincidence of this list. This is true for all Ichidan verbs. And the ru is also the suffix that changes when you conjugate them, making everything that comes before the root. It comes even better with Ichidan verbs. When we take a look back at the hiragana chart, you can see the a, I, u, e, o. Or that there are 5 rows or 5 levels. Remember when I said Ichidan translates into 1 level? It's because they don't jump to another row when you conjugate them. As example, tabaru, the tabe will always stay as root and never change when conjugating. Only the ru at the end changes. There are pretty much no exceptions to that rule with Ichidan verbs. This means if you know how you can conjugate one Ichidan verb and you understand what is the root of an Ichidan verb, you can conjugate all Ichidan verbs with that knowledge. Pretty amazing, right? However, let's not forget that the majority of verbs fall into the other category, and that is Godan verbs, which translates into 5-level. Because when you conjugate them, the vowel at the end will change, and that over all 5 levels. As we can see here with the example of nomu, to drink. The good news is it's not as complicated as it may look. The root nom stays for most conjugation intact. The exceptions are the te and the ta forms, which can make conjugating Godan verbs more difficult. But more about that when we talk about the specific conjugations. So the bad news is, for once, the te and the ta form are being used often, so you are not getting away without learning them. And second, while for other conjugations the root stays intact, works for most Godan verbs, there are some exceptions. But these exceptions are for other lessons. This is as deep as I want to go with conjugation for this video. So don't worry about them for now, then sadly there are some more bad news. I'm afraid the exceptions won't end here. There are verbs that don't fall into any of the two categories, Godan nor Ichidan, because their conjugations are completely different. The good news is there are only two verbs in the exception categories, and that's suru, to do, and kuru, to come. Also, these verbs are used so much in the Japanese language that you will learn their conjugation over time if you keep practicing Japanese. But of course, we will talk about them in further lessons again when we talk about the specific conjugations. For these lessons, I want to stay with Godan and Ichidan verbs and their dictionary form. Then the last thing we look at in this video is how can you identify a verb into one of the categories. First of all, and most simple rule, I already told you that all Ichidan verbs end with ru, and there is no exception. So if you see a verb with a different ending, it's for sure a Godan verb. Now the problem is there are Godan verbs that end with ru. In these cases you have to look at the vowels before the ru. All Ichidan verbs use the vowels I or E before the ru. If the vowel is A, U, or an O, it's for sure a Godan verb. But again, there are also Godan verbs that end with I or E before the ru. So the only thing left to do here is to look at how it is written in kanji and kana. I'm sorry to tell you, but romanji isn't sufficient enough. It's very important that you get used to kanji and kana writing, even if you can't read kanji. Best example I can give you here to show you this is the two verbs kairu and kairu. And if I show you them in romanji only, you probably will say, but that's the same word. But what if I tell you that the one on the left is a Godan verb and the one on the right is an Ichidan verb? They also have two completely different meanings. The one to the left means to return, and the one to the right means to change. This difference becomes only clear if you show them written with kanji and kana. Back to identifying which is an Ichidan verb and which is a Godan verb. For most of them, Godan verbs ending with ru and have an I or E vowel are written with their kanji and then directly followed up by ru. Ichidan verbs on the other hand have the vowel I and E often written after the kanji as an additional kana syllable. So while this method is not anything but bulletproof, it narrows it down quite a bit and is pretty useful. If all of this feels too much and too complicated for you right now, don't worry, for that I created the practice video. I'm certain after seeing some more examples and after practicing them a little bit, it won't be that difficult to understand. But before that, I recommend you to watch part 2, which explains for what the dictionary form is being used. Thank you for watching, I hope this was helpful. If you have any questions, put them in the comments and I will try to answer them to the best of my knowledge. And have a wonderful day.